I'm glad to be here to discuss the challenges facing countries to combat COVID. And as a member of the Economic Research Institute team, I would like to talk about the measures of Kazakhstan towards national economic recovery. So next slide, please. The COVID pandemic has turned the world economy upside down. Interestingly, at the beginning of this year, various economists and international organizations were talking about and forecasted the recovery from the lowest growth rates from the past financial crisis from 2008. But unfortunately, instead of it, we are facing that various countries in developed and developed world are facing struggling against the crisis, and the global economy entered a serious recession starting from February. According to the IMF forecast, the world economy will fall by 4.9% in 2020, which will lead to which will affect the labor market, and of course, will rise the unemployment rates in all over the world. We are witnessing unprecedented outflow of foreign direct investments from the developing world, decline of the world trade, and the disruption of global and regional supply chain. And according to the IMF and WHO, the crisis of this current scale happens once in 100 years. Next slide, please. The economies of Kazakhstan's main export trading partners have rapidly declined, and reflecting the impact of the COVID-19. So to combat, we can see that the USA, China, EU, and Russia are showing the great decline in their growth rates. To combat the crisis, countries all over the world, and especially those countries that are using countercyclical fiscal policies, increasing their expenditures, use fiscal stimulus measures in order to protect their lives, protect their population and businesses and their economies, which will lead, of course, to the increase of budget deficit and the corresponding level of debt. So, for example, in the US, the debt is expected to rise to 30 percentage points this year, in EU for 25. And as we will see, Kazakhstan is not an exception here. So next slide, please. According to the global decline, Kazakhstan, with a tight trading and investment partnership with the main countries like Russia, our trade main countries like Russia, China, and EU, of course, high dependency in the oil market. Kazakhstan is vulnerable, very vulnerable to the COVID spillover. As a result, Kazakhstan economy fell by 5.8% in the second quarter of this year compared to the second quarter of the previous year, while in the first quarter there was a growth of 2,007%. Kazakhstan authorities swiftly introduced decisive measures of support in order to mitigate the impact of COVID. Firstly, there was closed borders, halted air travel, and there were other restrictions on travel. After that, Kazakhstan authorities introduced two lockdown measures. First was from March, which was lasted for 2 months. And second one was lasted 1.5 months, started from July. And of course, as a result of the lockdown and other economic slowdown, about 300,000 business entities suspended their activities. 1 million business entities were directly affected, especially in the service and trade sectors. And of course, 4.5 million people received social benefits due to the lockdown. Next slide, please. As we said, the COVID affected to all the sectors of the economy. Especially it was the wholesale and trade transportation because of the lockdown. As we can see in the first graph, there was the Kazakhstan economy is showing W-shaped recovery path. So the main two local minimums was in the April and in the July, where the lockdown, where in the country was in the lockdown. We can see that the mining sector is also in the negative territory because due to the Kazakhstan agreement in OPEC+. And due to this agreement, Kazakhstan should decline their oil production. For example, in the 2019, Kazakhstan produced more than 90 million tons, while in this year, this will drop to the 85. But at the same time, telecom sector, not surprisingly, and construction, agricultural, manufacturing sectors having great support to the economic recovery of the Kazakhstan. Next slide, please. So, as I said before, Kazakhstan authorities introduced large-scale measures of support not only health measures, but also the measures of supporting the business and the people. We can divide these measures into 6 main blocks. For those reasons, government allocated 14.8 billion, almost 15 billion dollars to support, which is almost 9% of the GDP, which is compared to other developed countries, even developed countries, it's a high amount of money. So first is maintaining household economic welfare, which is mean that government gave cash transfers to the 4 and 5 million population people. They received their transfers on the realm of a minimum wage. Government also indexed the social benefit payments by 10%. Also, even if people do not contribute to the medical insurance system, they also covered for all expenses during this period, this difficult period. Government also has great support measures to the household expenses. For example, 1 million low income and socially vulnerable people and the people with disabilities receive food baskets and daily non-food essentials. Also, government has banks not to charge fines for the loans and business loans. Also, government introduced in the large-scale employment program. In order to protect businesses, the government extended the due date for all taxes paid by SMEs till the end of 2020. Some industries, for example, agro and food, in agro food industries, the VAT was reduced to till 0%. Some SMEs in the service sectors were allowed not to pay the property tax from one year from this period. Next slide, please. Also, there was a measures on improving the firm liquidity and cash flow. For example, there was a government provided a package of liquidity provision measures by scaling up off-budget provisions of subsidized credit to SMEs. There was a new affordable housing program introduced. Also, we know that Kazakhstan, with a high share of the oil in their export, is very vulnerable on the tenge exchange rate is very vulnerable when the oil prices is volatile. So in order to ensure the exchange rate stability, National Bank of Kazakhstan acted as a sole dealer for foreign currency sales via auctions. Also, for state-owned enterprises, they were asked to sell their foreign currency on the market if it's not used for the state goals within 10 days. Also, for all state-owned enterprises, asked to direct their dividends payments to the state budget in order to ensure the stability of the budgetary system. And also in the financial sectors, for the borrowers who didn't pay their loans because of the lockdown, there was an overturn of borrowers' negative history. If they pay their debt, 50% of debt in the following 1 year. Also, there was a new licensing of microfinance activities introduced. So all those measures, next slide, please. Of course, all those measures affected the budget system of Kazakhstan and the budgetary stance. As we said, the large-scale amount of money of 9% of GDP were allocated, and more than half of it came from the Republican budget. So that's why during this crisis, in order to mitigate the negative impact of COVID, the government stated that there is a cyclical policy is needed. So that's why we can see that the sharp decline of the deficit till 2.8%. But the main part of this deficit was recovered by the receipt of transfer from the national fund. And in the structure of the budget, it increased to the 45% in the first half of this year. So next slide, please. So in conclusion, we can say that Kazakhstan economy is affecting 5 forces. 2 of them as external forces, 2 of them internal forces. So first of all, internal forces. So first, having in mind that there is a high dependence on the oil market, there is a high dependence having in mind that there is a high dependence having in mind that there is a high dependence having in mind that there is a high dependence having in mind that there is a high dependence having in mind that there is a high dependence having in mind that there is a high dependence having reached their 17 years minimum, and sometimes WTI futures even was in the negative territory. So this was affecting, and this will affect the recovery path of the economy of Kazakhstan. And the second one is that economic slump in the main trading partners of the Kazakhstan. So we can see that in China, in Russia, in Euro area, in USA, there is a great slump of economic activity. But at the same time, Kazakhstan, under the OPEC Plus agreement, cuts its oil production, as I said it before. So this, of course, will lead to the economic recovery path. And at the same time, Kazakhstan economy was 14 weeks under lockdown in the March, April, May, and July and August. Of course, it's affected greatly on the service sector activities in transportation and wholesale, in the other sectors of this service. So all of these forces are turning the economic activity down, but at the same time, Kazakhstan's authorities introduced the large-scale measures of support to the economy. There were 2 packages of anti-crisis measures, and there was a comprehensive plan for the recovery and economic growth was implemented, which make it possible to reassure the activity in the service sector where 6 million people are employed. So I think that's it is for me. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have questions, I would like to answer them.
We are the consulting firm of Germany's largest economic research institute, and I will give you a presentation of our economic forecast, which we did in September. So these numbers may be informative for you and will reflect the economic impact of the Corona challenge from different angles. Here you can see the decomposition of GDP by quarter. And we already saw in the first quarter of this year an impact of -2%, and in the second quarter of -9.7%. This is the impact on the German economy. The -6.7 in the box is the current forecast for the entire year. And in brackets, you see our previous forecast, which we did in April, which was much more pessimistic, where we forecasted a decline of -9.4%. The reason for this improvement is that we saw a very fast recovery in the second and also now in the beginning of the third quarter of in the third quarter of this year. And you can see that the growth rate will be in the third quarter 3.8%, 1.8% in the fourth quarter. And the next year we will hover around 1.5%. And in 2020, the growth rate will decline to 1% and lower by the quarterly growth rate. So that it looks like that in 2022, the German economy will recover to the pre-crisis levels as concerns GDP. If you look at the gross value added, the contributions to growth are mainly here decomposed in manufacturing and service sectors. And you can see that the impact is much larger in the service industries than in manufacturing. However, the decline in manufacturing is still significant. This is probably not surprising, as most of you know that especially service industries were affected by the lockdown, which was also in place in Germany. All leisure-related activities, but also other service sectors declined. And we will see that in the third quarter of this year, both will return to some moderate growth again, and this will hover over the next years in a manner that it will decline gradually. If we look at the demand side, then we see that we had a significant drop in consumption. This is, of course, the mirror figure to the decline in services. But Germany also experienced a significant drop in exports, which means that international supply chains were disrupted. So this is the impact of the Corona crisis in the major trading partner countries of Germany. And we also see that a significant drop in investment. This is the blue part in the here. However, this will return again to some positive growth rates in the third and fourth quarter. Again, we expect that investment will increase and that net exports will recover slightly in the third quarter, but will remain insignificant in their contribution to German GDP over the next quarters until 2022. Here we see the GDP, the quarterly GDP, which is around 810 billion euros before the impact of the crisis, and you see the significant drop in the second quarter. And here you can see that in the end of first quarter of 2022, we will recover to pre-crisis levels, and we are way below the potential production level of the German economy. Here we decompose this decline into the different segments. The first is the green line is the domestic use. We see a significant drop, but the much bigger impact we see on exports and also on the import side. If you look on the demand side, then government consumption is quite stable and increasing. We see a significant drop in household consumption, and we see also a significant drop in investment. The surprising element here is that construction investment is bottoming a little bit, but remains positive and will increase again over the next quarters. So that construction is something like a stabilizing sector in the German economy. Now the impact on the labor market. This is again quarterly figures. On the left part of the slide, you see the number of employees, and in the second quarter, the number of employees in Germany declined by more than 600,000 people. And we see that the growth in employment, which we expect for the next quarters, will not compensate for this decline in employment, which we saw already in the second quarter and which continues also in the third quarter. On the right side of the slide, you see some German specialty. This is so-called short-time workers, which means that in Germany we have an institution in place that if corporate and economic active agents declare that they are short on work, they can apply for subsidies at the Federal Employment Office. And then the Federal Employment Office will compensate up to 85% of the monthly wages and of the workers in short-time work conditions. You see that about 4.7 million workers are on short-time work in the second quarter. This is mostly in the manufacturing business and mostly in the German automobile production. So this is the largest number or the largest group within this short-time workers. And you will see that with the increased economic activity over the next quarters, this number will decline significantly, but will remain positive until the end of 2022. During the recession, the government decided that the short-time work subsidies paid to the companies will be extended beyond initially it was 6 months, then it was extended to 1 year, and now it's extended to up to 2 years. So this will, therefore we will see high figures of short-time workers also in 2021. If you look at gross value added, then we see the impact, if you decompose it, that we have the green part is the reduction of employees, which is a big negative, almost minus 3% in gross value added. But you see also the impact, the large impact of short-time working. This is what I just mentioned, this German specialty. And then we have also a significant drop in productivity by working hour. This is what we can see from the official statistics. We expect that this will be improving. This drop in productivity by working hour reflects that it took a while until people in home office and people in production switch to digital technologies and improve their communication and digital productivity. So that's an impact here. So we expect that this is a learning impact, and hourly productivity will increase again over the next quarters. If you look here at this is a summary. Oh, sorry. This is a summary of what I just said. So we expect GDP to decline by -6.7% in 2020. Next year, the growth rate will be about 4.5% for the German economy. Yeah, so that's here the interesting part. If you look at the working time, you see that the working time by employees was reduced, but also the volume of work was significantly reduced in this year, which will again pick up over the course of next year. This colorful slide shows you the different components of the German economic recovery plan. This is just the national economic recovery plan. It is complementary, or the complementary element to it will be the European economic recovery plan, in which also Germany will participate to some small extent. The largest impact, or the largest component of the economic recovery plan, are a reduction in taxes. This is mostly a reduction of value-added tax by 3%, from 19% VAT to 16%. This tax reduction will be in place, or is in place from until end of year, and will be in place for about 6 months. So this is a short-term measure which has an impact of about 30 billion euros. This is the government tries to stimulate consumption now during the crisis, so that high value items are also still bought by consumers and others. The other part here, the other large part, are subsidies. These are mostly the subsidies for the short-time workers, which are also funded by the government budget and implemented through the State Employment Agency. Yeah, the other components of minor importance, some of them, like government consumption and current transfers, are contributing partially to it. And there's some gross fixed investment in assets. This is mostly government participation in companies like Deutsche Lufthansa, etc., where government is injecting capital to let's say, to save the major airline operator in Germany from bankruptcy. We will see that the tax subsidies, or the stimulus from tax reduction, will decline, and then in 2022 it will turn negative, which means simply the taxes will be increased again, and the tax collection will be used to finance the expenditures of the government to a larger extent. However, we see also that the subsidies, again, mostly short worker subsidies, will remain in place in 2021, and then they will bottom out until the end of 2025, but will be still significant. The simulation of this economic recovery plan in our macroeconometric model shows that without this recovery plan, the decline in GDP would be 1.3% stronger. So that is a significant impact. However, it's also a huge amount of stimulus injected into the economy. If you look at the government revenue and government expenditure ratios, here you see on the left side of the slide, on the left-hand scale, the tax and social security contributions as percent of nominal GDP. So tax collection, that's over the last years, and then the government revenue is the green line. You see the drop after the financial crisis in 2009, and then a steady increase to very high levels, and now a small drop, but the projection is that government revenue will increase again in 2021, 2022. On the right side of the screen, you see the government expenditure by different categories. On the left-hand scale are interest and gross investment as percentage of nominal value of GDP. On the right-hand scale is the government expenditure ratio. The significant information here is, from my point of view, the interest expenditure. As you can see, from 2007, interest expenditure of the government declined to very low levels by 2020, and we expect it to continue to decline. This is part of the monetary policy of the European Central Bank, which has a negative lending rate at the overnight lending rate in the banking sector, which has of course also an impact on the interest rate the German government has to pay. And then of course Germany is also something like a safe haven or stable in a stable financial situation. On my last slide, you see the net lending, net borrowing of the government over the last years. We saw in 2007 we had a deficit, so which then turned into a negative position in 2009 with the financial crisis of 2009. And 2009, 10, and 11, the German government borrowed about 213 billion euros on the capital market. And then it took almost 8 years from 2012 to 2018 to repay this and to run profits over the years. And now the stimulus package in 2020 has already a magnitude of the entire volume of the fiscal stimulus package of the previous crisis. And this will continue next year and then also in 2022. So this is in a nutshell what is the situation on the ground in Germany. We expect that by end of year the deficit to GDP ratio will be around 80% of GDP, so still in line with so still above the Maastricht criteria, but not comparable to the situation in the United States, Japan, or other countries. So thank you very much, and I'm open to receive your questions afterwards.
So I will talk about the energy situation of today and try to give some information about what it could be in the future. Today, a little bit more than 80% of the global primary energy supply is from fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas. Fossil origin means that to produce energy by combustion, we emit CO2 and other greenhouse gases, and so it is contributing to the global warming. You all know that. On top of that, 2020, this year, we are experiencing the COVID crisis, which is severely, as you have well shown, damaging the economic life of the world. For example, I recall something which was really incredible. The price of the oil became negative last April in the United States, which was something you could not imagine. So this is a problem that I hope in 2 or 3 years will be over. Now let's address the climate change, which was the biggest problem before the COVID. The climate change is linked to the rapid increase of the world population and its use of energy. The global population today, we are around 7.8 billion people and will be around 10 billion people on Earth in 2050, which leads to an increase of energy demand estimated to about 50% compared to today. And this increase will be mainly in emerging countries. So what is the situation? The energy demand will be growing rapidly and at the same time reducing CO2 emission linked to the human activity and contributing to climate warming will be a priority. So this situation is clearly conflictual. But the structure of energy demand is bound to change over time with the decline of fossil fuels and increasing share of renewable energies. So a small digression. Why such a dominance of fossil fuels today? Because they have tremendous qualities, plentiful resources, very high energy content in reduced volume, fairly cheap, easy to carry, which means that they are really difficult to replace, particularly in the transportation sector. But of course, they have a major fault, which is the emission of greenhouse gases, which contributes, as you know, to the warming of the planet. So what could be the solution to this problem? The first one is fairly obvious. This is energy efficiency and energy conservation. What is energy efficiency? It is using less energy to provide the same service. For example, a better isolation of buildings will need less energy. Energy conservation is the prevention of the prevention of the wasteful use of energy. Example, you turn off the light when you leave a room. So those are the most simple, fastest, and cleanest ways to face the increasing demand of energy and to decrease energy consumption. It is interesting to note that 9 out of 10 voluntary contributions announced by the 195 states which signed the Paris Agreement refer to energy efficiency. So this is something we don't talk too much about, but this is something which is really important. But of course, this implies a change in people's behavior and way of life. The second solution, also fairly obvious, is to replace the fossil sources of energies by other sources which are well known. There is first the nuclear, but you know that the Fukushima effect is slowing down. Now nuclear energy, not stopping, but slowing down. Solar, wind, hydro, geothermal, marine energy, and so on and so on. This movement of replacing is underway, but it is slow because all the qualities of the fossil fuels that I mentioned, and also but because those new techniques are fairly expensive and not yet suitable for particular uses as, for example, air transportation. Moreover, the question of intermittency of those sources and the question of the necessity of power storage has not been resolved so far. So, you know, the situation is in evolution, but in full swing. And what is really interesting is to note that today there is a lot of money invested into those new technologies, new energies. And the financial world today is convinced that clean energy is a smart investment. Let's have a look briefly on the oil and gas industry. Because, of course, Kazakhstan is a big producer of oil. And to address this question, we have to talk about the global carbon budget. What is the global carbon budget? This is the total amount of carbon in the Earth's atmosphere, seas and land. Okay. To make it short, limiting global warming requires staying in the limit of carbon content in the atmosphere. You can understand that. And for an increase of temperature limited to 1.5 2 degrees, this limit is estimated to 3,000 gigatons of CO2. This is the limit. Anthropogenic, which means emission made by the man, CO2 emission since the pre-industrial period are estimated to approximately 2,200 gigatons of CO2. What does it mean? It means that the associated remaining CO2 budget is around 800 gigatons of CO2. That means that starting from today, we cannot emit more than 800 gigatons of CO2 in the atmosphere. And at the current use of fossil fuels, we will reach this emission in 25 to 30 years. So this is, what are the consequences? The reserves of oil are estimated to 40, 50 years. Reserves of gas estimated to 50, 70 years. Or we cannot burn all those resources. In this scenario, that means, and this is important for Kazakhstan and for all the oil-producing countries, that an important quantity of already well-known and defined resources will not be produced or developed. Only the resources with the lowest production, development, and or discovery cost will be eligible to supply energy. And I would say that this is fairly new because it was a hypothesis, but now in the oil industry, I'm coming from the oil industry, we believe that this is true and this will be true. Donc, what are the consequences? Number one, the probability is that oil companies will produce, as a matter of priority, cheapest reserves and the easiest to develop. Consequence number two, oil and gas company will develop gas as a priority. Why? Because gas combustion is emitting 2 times less of CO2 than coal for the same energy produced. Consequence number three, big oil companies in Europe and in USA, I would say all the big oil companies are reviewing their strategy and investing more and more in power generation, transmission and distribution. For example, Total, coming from this company, has committed to carbon neutrality in 2050 and aims to install a capacity of 25 gigawatts of renewable power by 2025, 5 years from now. And I recall that this is equivalent to about 20 nuclear reactors. Okay, so what are the scenarios for the future? There are many different scenarios and they are all different. They come from agencies, from governments, from companies, but all those scenarios, they say that fossil fuel will be still important, the most important source of energy in the coming years until, let's say, 2050. So that means that we will still emit a lot of CO2. And so this shows the necessity of what we call carbon capture and storage, CCS, which means that we can capture the CO2 emitted by fossil fuels and inject this CO2 into the ground, okay? And this is fast developing. And today, there are only 21 carbon capture facilities in activities in the world. There are about 30 projects, but for a total of 37 billion of US dollars. So that's a lot. And of course, if we want companies and industry to have recourse to the CCS, we have to put a tax on the CO2 emissions. And this is a big problem. It is a political problem. It is a technical problem. And it is currently discussed everywhere in the world. But we don't know exactly what will come out of that. Okay, this was a little bit short. I tried to make a large outlook of the question, and of course I am ready to try to answer your questions, if any. Thank you very much.
I must say that I'm from Italy, but my expertise is mostly concentrated in Kazakhstan, where I've been living for the previous 3 years, and that's why my presentation will focus mostly on Kazakhstan. And I think it also links up back to the first presentation that Kwanish gave us at the beginning with the measures to come out of the crisis, let's say. So in the next slide, I show basically just the oil price slump in 2020 and how the fall in oil prices was quite sharp, and it was basically a combination of factors, which many people have called double whammy, and many people have said that these are lower for longer oil price years. So the oil price will stay at about $40 to $50 for the coming future. And that is basically an optimistic scenario at this point. In the next slide, I would like to explain more this double whammy that has hit most oil-producing countries, but also Kazakhstan. First of all, the price dispute between Russia and Saudi Arabia, which climaxed at the beginning of March. And then the spread of COVID-19 and the fall in demand of oil across the globe, especially from China, but then also from Europe, it had a negative effect on oil exporting countries. Demand is expected to fall by 9.3 million barrels of oil per day in 2020. Compared to last year, which is really, it's going to affect the economies of oil-producing countries. Lower oil prices also meant, and an oversupply of oil after the price dispute between Russia and Saudi Arabia, meant that oil became untradeable, basically, and tankers filled with oil were not docking into the ports and not selling their oil because, as we heard before, we had periods of very low or even negative oil prices, and so it was unprofitable to trade it. Pipeline oils also, oil trade was also affected, and specifically in the case of Kazakhstan, the two main pipelines going to the west, the Caspian Pipeline Consortium, and the one going to the east to China, were affected by lower demand both in China and globally. And falling profits from the side of producing companies and state-owned enterprises working on the oil sector also meant falling tax revenues. The biggest tax contributors in Kazakhstan, for example, are oil and gas companies. And if they don't make enough profits, they will probably pay less in taxes in the future years. Another thing is that many countries, including Kazakhstan, have been unable to fully assist the growing unemployment. As we even saw it in Germany in the slides before, but Kazakhstan, as according to the data, has been affected even more strongly. Also because the unemployment problems had started before this crisis. One of the last protests before the crisis for about unemployment and underemployment in the Mangistau region was in February 2020, for example. And this basically explains how it's also a trend of both endemic crisis and internal problems that has been affected by this double whammy of oil price slump and COVID. In the next slide, I would like to highlight the fact that we all know that the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, borders are closed and travel is restricted, but still, as I try to tell in this presentation, we haven't done away with the oil economy. The ripple effect that we've seen also explained in the previous presentations was that from big to small, the crisis has affected several companies, but also infrastructure projects that have been postponed, sovereign wealth funds that have eroded their reserves, and small and medium enterprises have been suffering, which also has had a negative effect on employment. And to bring in examples from Kazakhstan, the pandemic was a major opportunity for transnational corporations, for example, to engage in social responsibility. There were private companies in the Atirau and Mangistau regions that bought medical equipment, built hospital facilities, delivered food supplies, and these charitable actions were also instrumental for these companies to improve their own workers' conditions, to ensure the healthy return of their workers. But we've seen that basically this meant that, as experts said a few days ago at the Kyoga conference, that transnational corporations fulfill the role of the state, which again, it becomes problematic because it's voluntary. So it's not really directed to the well-being of everybody, but it's mostly directed to the recovery of the bottom line of the companies and to the resumption of profitability. But because the Kazakhstan continues to be reliant on oil, as long as oil dependency persists, Kazakhstan will continue to be just one oil price slump away from another economic downturn, which is not a good position to be in terms of the economic stability of the country. In the next slide, I would like to say more about the fact that Kazakhstan's compliance with the OPEC plus supply cuts was not really dependent on the request from OPEC plus, but mostly had to do with the internal oil production trends. So before 2019, Kazakhstan was not compliant with OPEC price cuts because the Kashagan offshore project started. Now, old and the least profitable oil projects have become less, have produced less, and so now we can see a cut in oil production. But I don't think it has a lot to do with the request from the OPEC Plus organization. In addition, we have to make sure to look deeply into the eroding reserves, both of the sovereign wealth fund, but also in the oil reserves. Kazakhstan has very important and very promising oil fields across the country, but also very old and declining oil fields across the region. The Samruk-Kazyna Wealth Fund has promised to transfer money to the state budget and to make up for these year's losses. But this could also dent the sustainability of the sovereign wealth fund, which could be problematic again for the future. But again, the sovereign wealth fund is built for these rainy days, so we need to expect it to step up in these periods. Also, the government budgeted about between $20 and $30 oil price per barrel for this year. So it's trying to be ready for an economic downturn. But yet again, I want to stress that the Kazakhstan oil economy hasn't really changed. And this also has to do with the fact that supporting the jobs means that, or the lack of jobs has had another effect on the state budget. There was a program to support people who lost their jobs with $100 check every month. But this also will now, this was not enough, of course, and so this had another effect, which was putting pressure on banks, and so it's going to be financially also, it's going to be a very difficult way back because of the effect on the financial liquidity of local banks. I would like to also say that as one of the last sort of sentences in the negative side of things, that we, especially as foreign observers, have not, in the previous slide, sorry, that we have not seen sort of the fulfilling of the promise of the Astana Expo, which had the slogan "Energy of the Future." It was talking about renewable energy, digitalization, and despite some progress, we haven't seen a significant turn. Renewable energy sources have not yet become a significant part of Kazakhstan's energy mix. And that, again, the fact that Kazakhstan is an oil economy means that GDP growth will slow down at every oil price slump. In the next slide, again, like experts have said that without fundamental changes, it will be hard for oil and gas to go back to earlier profitability, both globally but also in Kazakhstan. And so, as President Tokayev mentioned in his latest address to the nation, there needs to be a green growth plan, which I argue should also be focused on humans rather than profitability, because as we mentioned before, fossil fuels are cheap, fossil fuels are easy to find, but they also contribute to climate change. They also contribute to pollution. They're not sustainable because they produce rents that are not dynamic. So I would stress that from Tokayev's address to the nation. Another of the solutions that I see necessary and also quite achievable is to build a more predictable system of rule of law that will bolster trust from foreign investors. In addition, I would like also to highlight how in line my analysis is with the one from Quanish, talking about local development in the regions of Kazakhstan. It's a vast territory that cannot be reduced to just the cities of Almaty and Nur-Sultan. Every region has its own specificities and could have enormous potential for growth. And also, I would like to also stress the fact that an enhanced cooperation with Kazakhstan's neighbors will sink Central Asian economies and hopefully ensure beneficial regional cooperation among them. And I hope that this was exhaustive enough, but if there's any more questions, I'd be happy to answer. Thank you.